There are people who walk into a room and case it without knowing they're doing it. Then there are people who walk into a room and case it because not doing so once cost them everything. Kate Morrison was the second kind. She came through the front door of Murphy's Roadside Diner at 23 minutes past 2 on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and in the 4 seconds it took her to cross the threshold and clear the entrance, she had already counted 7 customers. Noted the positions of both exits, identified the only booth with an unobstructed sightline to the parking lot, and clocked the fact that the ceiling fan above table 9 had a wobble that would make it loud enough to mask a conversation at normal speaking volume. She chose the booth by the window, not because the light was good, not because she liked watching the traffic move along Route 40. She chose it because it put her back against a solid wall, kept both the front door and the kitchen exit within her peripheral vision, and placed her close enough to the window that if things went sideways, she had options. Not great options, but options. Old habits. The kind that don't fade. The kind that were drilled into you over 4 combat deployments until they stopped being habits at all and became the simple architecture of how you move through the world. She positioned her wheelchair at the edge of the booth and locked the brake with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times in 10,000 rooms. A small adjustment, automatic. The chrome frame caught the afternoon light coming through the window, and for a moment the whole chair seemed to glow warm and hard at the same time, like something that had been through fire and come out the other side still holding its shape. On the side of the chair affixed near the armrest was a small rectangular patch. A Special Forces tab, distinctive airborne wings above it. Below it the words De Oppresso Liber, to free the oppressed. The patch was not for show. It had never been for show. Kate Morrison was 34 years old. She had dark brown hair she kept pulled back without ceremony, sharp green eyes that had a particular steadiness to them, not cold, not warm, but focused, the way a compass needle is focused, and the kind of physical presence that had nothing to do with size. She was not a large woman, but there was a density to her stillness, a weight to the way she held herself upright that made her seem like the most solid object in any room she occupied. She flagged down the waitress without looking up and ordered coffee. Black, no sugar. Then she opened her book, The Art of War, Sun Tzu. A copy so worn that the spine had cracked and been repaired twice with tape, and the margins were filled with handwriting so small and dense, it looked like a second language running alongside the original text, which in a way it was. The annotations moved through the pages the way a long conversation moves, starting clearly, getting complicated in the middle, they arriving somewhere that only makes sense because of everything that came before. She read, and while she read, she watched. Murphy's Roadside Diner had been sitting on the eastern edge of Albuquerque since 1987, when a man named Gerald Murphy decided that what the stretch of Route 40 really needed was a place where truckers could get a hot meal that tasted like something a human being had cooked. Gerald Murphy had been dead for 11 years. His daughter Patricia ran the place now with the same philosophy and considerably better coffee. The diner smelled like it had always smelled. Bacon grease and pie crust, and the sweet, sharp combination of old coffee and fresh coffee happening simultaneously. The floor was black and white checkered linoleum, worn smooth in the high-traffic areas near the register and the kitchen door. The booths were red vinyl cracked in places and repaired with strips of tape that almost matched. The walls held framed photographs of the surrounding desert, some local sports memorabilia, and a hand-lettered sign above the register that read, "If you're in a hurry, you're in the wrong place." The jukebox in the corner played Merle Haggard at a volume low enough that it didn't interrupt conversation, but loud enough that you were always aware of it, a kind of musical wallpaper, the sound of a particular version of America that was getting harder to find the further you got from places like this. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, Murphy's held 11 people. A young couple in the corner booth, early 20s, sharing apple pie with the easy comfort of people who had been sharing food long enough that it had stopped being romantic and become simply natural. A family of 4 near the back, father, mother, 2 kids under 10, the father on his phone, while the kids negotiated aggressively over the last of the French fries. 2 truckers at the counter, men in their 50s, with the broad shoulders of people who spent their lives moving things that were heavier than most people could lift. Jenny Aldrich, 19 years old, working the floor on her 3rd week at the Trum, still learning which tables tipped and which ones didn't, still startling slightly every time the kitchen bell rang. Patricia Murphy herself visible through the service window, moving between the grill and the prep counter with the fluid efficiency of someone who had been doing this for decades. And Everett Calloway. Everett Calloway sat at the far end of the counter, second stool from the wall, in the same spot he had occupied every Tuesday afternoon for the past 9 years. He was 71 years old, built like a man who had been strong once and was still holding on to most of it, with white hair cropped close to his head and hands that rested flat on the counter like they were accustomed to keeping themselves still. He wore a button-down shirt, clean and pressed, in a Desert Storm veteran's cap that had darkened at the brim from years of use. He ordered the same thing every Tuesday: coffee, the meatloaf special, and whatever pie Patricia had made that morning. He had been coming to Murphy's since the year his wife Carol died of a stroke at 62. He had come the Tuesday after the funeral because he did not know what else to do with a Tuesday afternoon, and he had come every Tuesday since for the same reason. Not grief exactly, not ritual. Something quieter than either of those words suggests. The simple discipline of a man who had learned in the desert outside Kuwait City in 1991 that showing up is itself a form of courage when the reasons for showing up have become hard to name. He was not a man who talked much. He was a man who sat with his coffee and watched the room with eyes that had learned to notice things that other eyes glossed over. He noticed Kate Morrison the moment she came through the door. He watched her choose her booth, watched the way she positioned the chair, watched her lock the brake and open her book and settle into a quality of stillness that he recognized the way you recognize a word in a foreign language you once knew but haven't spoken in years. He recognized what she was the same way one old tree can recognize the grain of another's wood, and he went back to his coffee and his meatloaf and left her to her afternoon. At the table by the window, Kate Morrison was not entirely reading her book. She was reading it. Sun Tzu's words moved through her mind with the fluency of someone who had absorbed them so completely that they had stopped being text and become a kind of internal grammar, a way of parsing the world. All warfare is based on deception. Her eyes moved along the line. Her left hand turned the page, and the rest of her attention was watching Warren Fisk. He was in the corner booth, 55 years old. Gray suit that had been expensive once and was now just old. Silver hair neatly parted. The kind of face that had probably been unremarkably handsome 20 years ago and had since settled into an expression of mild, permanent dissatisfaction. He was eating a turkey club and reading something on a tablet, and he looked like exactly what he appeared to be, a mid-level businessman killing time on a Tuesday afternoon, waiting for something or someone comfortable in his anonymity. Kate had been watching him for 37 minutes. She knew the route he had taken from Albuquerque. She knew the make of the truck he had parked at the far end of the lot. She knew that he had been in this diner 4 times in the past 3 weeks, always on a Tuesday, always between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, always in the same corner booth. She knew things about Warren Fisk that Warren Fisk would have been very surprised to learn that anyone knew. And she knew all of this because for the past 6 weeks she had been building a file on him that did not officially exist. Beneath the seat of her wheelchair, attached to the undercarriage with a rare earth magnetic case designed to look like a standard equipment pouch, was a device roughly the size of a thick paperback book. It contained a directional microphone sensitive enough to pick up a conversation at 40 feet in a moderately noisy room, a recorder with 96 hours of storage capacity, and a compressed data transmitter that could push everything it had collected to a secure server in 11 seconds when activated. The device had been running since she locked the brake on her chair. This was not an official operation. There was no paperwork authorizing it, no chain of command that had signed off, no legal framework that would protect Kate Morrison if it went wrong. It was a mission she had constructed herself from fragments of intelligence that other people had either missed or chosen not to pursue, and she was running it alone because she had decided that alone was the only way to run it without the wrong people finding out it was happening. She had not filed the operation through Colonel Hargrove's desk. She had not filed it through any desk she wasn't certain of. She had filed it through a protocol that routed directly to the FBI field office in Albuquerque, bypassing the chain of command entirely because somewhere in that chain there was a break she had not yet been able to locate, and she had chosen to operate as if the break was closer than it felt comfortable to assume. She had done more dangerous things, in places considerably more hostile than a diner in New Mexico, but those missions had had backup. She turned another page. Know the enemy and know yourself, and in 100 battles, you will never be in danger. The ceiling fan above table 9 wobbled and hummed. At 27 minutes past 2, a man named Caleb Merritt walked in. He was 27 years old, lean and deliberate in the way that comes from years of physical training, pushed past conditioning into something that changes how a person inhabits their body. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, a gray Henley work boots, and carried nothing except his keys and his phone. He had been home on leave from Fort Bragg for 4 days, and he had driven out here on something he couldn't have fully explained if anyone had asked. A pull in a direction. The kind that happens when your nervous system has been running at a certain pitch for long enough that rest feels like a problem to be solved, rather than a condition to be enjoyed. He pushed open the door, let it close behind him, and stood for 1 second inside the entrance. In that second, he had done exactly what Kate Morrison had done 37 minutes earlier. He had counted exits, assessed the room, noted positions, calculated distances. He was a sergeant first class with the 82nd Airborne Division, and he was very good at his job, and he was very tired. He was about to move toward a stool at the counter when something stopped him. It was not the Special Forces tab on the wheelchair by the window. He noticed that, but that was not what stopped him. What stopped him was the posture, the angle of her shoulders, the way she held the book present to it, but not absorbed by it, that attention distributed across the room in the way that only a certain kind of training produces. He had seen that quality of awareness before. He had seen it in a compound in Kandahar province in 2020, in the worst hours of the worst night of his military career, when a woman he had never met before had positioned herself between his team and an armed force 3 times their size and held that position for 6 hours while the rest of them got out. He stood very still. Then he walked quietly to a booth at the far end of the diner and sat with his back to the wall and ordered coffee and looked at his phone without reading anything on it. He had never learned her name. He had asked afterward and been given a look that communicated clearly that the answer was not the kind of thing that got shared. He had been alive because of her, and he had carried that fact for 4 years without anywhere to put it. Now she was sitting 30 feet away, reading a book, and he had absolutely no idea what to do with that. He did nothing. He held his coffee with both hands and watched her with the careful peripheral attention of someone trained not to stare directly at what they're tracking. Outside, the afternoon continued. The sky above Route 40 was the blue that happens in New Mexico in October, the kind of blue that makes distances look shorter than they are. The jukebox had moved on to Something by Hank Williams when the sound reached the diner first. Not words, not a specific noise, just a change in the quality of the afternoon, a deepening, a hardening. The way air sounds different when something heavy is moving through it. A low mechanical rumble that separated from the ambient highway sound and grew louder with a directional certainty that meant it was turning in. 3 Harley-Davidson engines. They came into the parking lot with the theatrical slowness of men who wanted to be seen arriving, loud enough to cut through the walls and register in the chest before the ears fully processed it. Customers near the windows looked up. Jenny Aldrich, carrying a dessert plate toward the family in the back booth, paused for just a moment in the middle of the floor. Everett Calloway set his coffee cup down very carefully and kept his eyes on the counter. Through the window, Kate Morrison saw them park. 3 men. The first was large, very large, with the mass of someone who had been physically powerful at one point and had added weight to it without losing the underlying structure. His vest carried the club's colors on the back, a skull in a motorcycle helmet wreathed in flames. Devil's Horseman. New Mexico. Rex Boland, 42 years old. 3 prior arrests, 2 convictions, 1 charge dropped under circumstances never fully explained. A face that had been broken and reset more than once, a jaw like a shelf, and eyes the color of weathered asphalt that moved across a room with the practiced efficiency of a man assessing territory. The second man, Cutter, was wiry with the restless energy of someone whose hands never fully stilled old scars along both knuckles from too many fights. The third scar was the quietest of the 3, and Kate noted him most carefully because of it. Still, men in violent groups are almost always the most dangerous. They dismounted and stood in the lot for a moment, performing the arrival. Then Rex pushed open the door and walked in like he owned the floor under his feet. The change in the diner was immediate and total, not a gasp or a sudden silence. A quieting, a contraction, the way a room breathes differently when something potentially dangerous has entered it. The family in the back booth went very still. The young couple stopped sharing therapy. The truckers at the counter looked at their coffee cups with the careful attention of men gauging a situation. Jenny Aldrich caught Kate's eye from across the room. Kate gave her nothing. A neutral face, a steady gaze. Not reassurance. Information, the information that Kate Morrison had already assessed this situation and had not yet determined it required a response. Rex Boland and his men took the center booth with the entitlement of men accustomed to taking whatever space appealed to them. Kate returned to her book. The next line her eyes moved across, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. She had written something in the margin beside it in ink so old it had faded to a pale brown. She had written, "Only if you plan for the chaos." She turned the page. Rex Boland saw the woman in the wheelchair when he sat down. He saw her the way he saw most things, category first, specific things second. Wheelchair, woman, alone. the automatic sorting of a mind that had learned to process the world in terms of threat and opportunity. Then he saw the tab on the side of the chair, the Special Forces tab. Something happened in his face. Not contempt, not the simple, dismissive curl that had been there a moment before. Something older than that, something that came from deeper. His jaw tightened. The muscles along his neck moved. His eyes, for just a fraction of a second, went somewhere that was not this diner on Route 40 on a Tuesday afternoon. Here is something that almost no one in that diner would have known Rex Boland had once wanted to earn that tab. He had wanted it the way young men want things that define what they believe a man should be. He had gone through the early stages of Special Forces selection in 2005 and had been removed not because he lacked physical capability, not because he couldn't think under pressure, but because of something he had done to another soldier, something witness reported and acted upon. He had spent the years since believing the report had been filed by a man named Captain Gerald Whitmore. He had never recovered from it, not in any of the ways that matter. He looked at the tab on Kate Morrison's wheelchair and felt twisting together in the complicated dark of his interior, life envy and rage, and something that in another man, in another life, might have been grief. He looked away. He ordered coffee from Jenny Aldrich without looking at her. He talked with Cutter and Scar about something else. He ate half a piece of pie. And then he looked at the woman by the window again. She had not looked at him, had not acknowledged the arrival of three men who had rearranged the atmospheric pressure of the entire room. Still sitting with her book, her coffee, her unreadable stillness. In Rex Boland's experience, everyone looked at him eventually. This woman was not looking at him. Something tightened in his chest. He put down his fork. He crossed the floor to her booth with the slow, heavy confidence of a man who has decided something. He stopped at the edge of her table. She turned a page. He stood there for a long moment. The diner felt it, the charged silence of a situation suspended between what it was and what it was about to become. Like the second before a weather change, when every living thing feels the pressure shift before any instrument measures it. "You deaf or just stupid," Rex said. His voice was not loud. That was in its way worse. Kate looked up from her book. Green eyes, level, not cold, not challenging. Present in the way that a landmark is present, fixed, unmoved, indifferent to the weather around it. "I heard you fine," she said. "Just that, nothing else." It was the most infuriating possible response. Cutter and Scar drifted over without being summoned, the three of them forming a rough semicircle around her table. Rex's eyes moved to the Special Forces tab. "Cute little badge," he said. "Where'd you get that surplus store? Or did somebody hand it to you in a Cracker Jack box?" Kate said nothing. "I'm talking to you." "I know you are." Calm, unhurried, as if the conversation was simply not presenting her with anything that required her full attention, which in a way it wasn't. Rex leaned down, putting his hands on the table, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, Kate could see things that the distance had softened, the specific quality of damage in his face, the way his eyes held something behind the aggression, something older, and something else, the recognition behind his contempt. He knew what that tab meant. Not casually, not from television. He knew it with the specificity of someone who had once been close enough to understand its weight. She filed that away. "I earned it," Kate said. Rex straightened up, looked at Cutter, and then he laughed, a sound like something tearing. Cutter and Scar joined it, the laughter of men performing certainty for each other. "Earned it," Rex repeated. "Right, they're handing those out to anyone these days, I guess." The family in the back booth had gone completely still. The young couple had their hands under the table. Jenny Aldrich had retreated to the far end of the counter, her eyes moving between Rex and Kate with the helpless attention of someone watching something unfold that she has no power to stop. Everett Calloway had both hands flat on the counter surface. The tendons on the back of his hands were visible. At the far booth, Caleb Merritt sat very still, his coffee abandoned, watching. Kate closed her book, gently, the way you close something you intend to return to. She placed it on the table with deliberate, unhurried care. And then she looked up at Rex Boland with the full attention she had been withholding, and the weight of that attention, direct, calm, steady, in a way that had nothing to do with passivity, made something shift in the room. "Gentlemen," she said, "I think you should go back to your table." The word gentleman delivered in that tone, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had given instructions in environments where not following them had permanent consequences, it did something to the air. Several customers looked up. Cutter's jaw tightened. Scar went very still. Rex stared at her. Then his face resolved into something simpler and more dangerous, a decision. And his hands moved. He grabbed the handles of Kate's wheelchair. The scrape of the chair against the linoleum was not loud, but it carried. Kate's hands gripped the armrest as the chair tilted, her knuckles white, her body held upright by the core strength that 4 years in a wheelchair builds when the person in it refuses to stop being ready. Her coffee cup toppled, hot liquid spreading across the table and into her lap. Then he shoved. The wheelchair hit the wall with a crash that rattled the framed photographs of the desert. The impact jarred the magnetic case beneath the seat. The latch broke, the case swung open, and its contents scattered across the linoleum with a sound like a brief rainfall of small light objects landing. Ribbons fanned out across the checkered floor. Bronze stars, a purple heart, a silver star given rarely for specific reasons, carrying a weight that every person in any branch of the military knows immediately. Certificates and small folded cards. And one larger folded item, a flag formally folded into a triangle, the kind given in specific circumstances. This one had been given to Kate Morrison by the Secretary of Defense himself. Across one corner in gold lettering that caught the afternoon light coming through the window, to Captain Kate Morrison, Green Beret, for extraordinary heroism in the face of impossible odds. The diner went completely silent. Not the silence of people being quiet, the silence of people who have stopped breathing. Everett Calloway looked at the ribbons spread across the floor. He looked at the name on the flag. Something moved in his face, deep tectonic, the kind of movement that doesn't show on the surface for a full second after it happens underneath. Caleb Merritt stood up, his chair scraped back. He was on his feet before he had consciously decided to be his body responding to something that bypassed the deliberative parts of his mind and went straight to where his deepest obligations lived. He stood with his hands at his sides, looking at the flag on the floor, and something passed across his face that required knowing what you were looking for to read. He knew that name. He had not known it 4 years ago. He had not been given it. But he had found it later in the quieter time, in the kind of research a person does when they are trying to understand what they owe and to whom. And now it was written in gold lettering on a flag spread across a linoleum floor, and the woman it belonged to was sitting against the wall with coffee on her lap and 3 men standing over her. Rex Boland looked at the flag, at the name, at the gold lettering. Kate Morrison straightened in her chair. Her hands moved to the wheels and she repositioned herself without hurry, her posture returning to exactly what it had been before, upright, level, undefeated. A few drops of coffee darkened her jeans. She did not look at them. She looked at Rex. And at the back of her wheelchair, in the magnetic case that had broken open against the wall, a device the size of a thick paperback book continued to run, its directional microphone still active. Its emergency broadcast function armed and waiting for a signal, the software defined as a significant impact event. The latch had broken, the case had opened, the device had not been damaged. And 40 seconds ago, when the wheelchair hit the wall with enough force to shatter the latch, the impact sensor had triggered. 11 seconds of compressed data had pushed to a secure server. A location ping had gone out. Somewhere that was not on Route 40 and not in New Mexico, a light that had not been lit before was now lit. Kate Morrison knew this. Rex Boland did not. Outside the sky above Route 40 was the deep, specific blue of a New Mexico afternoon. The kind of sky that makes you feel, if you're the kind of person who feels things about skies, that the world is very large and very clear, and that anything might happen in it. Anything at all. Part 2. The cost of being right. The silence after the flag hit the floor lasted 4 seconds. Kate counted them. Not with anxiety, not with fear, but with the automatic precision of a mind trained to measure time the way other minds measure distance, as something with tactical value as information. 4 seconds. Then Rex Boland stepped back from her wheelchair, and the silence broke, and the diner filled again with the ambient sound of 11 people trying to pretend they were not frightened. At the far booth, Caleb Merritt was on his feet. He stood with his hands at his sides, holding himself in check by conscious effort, watching the scene with the trained attention of a man who has learned to assess situations rather than simply react to them. He saw the flag on the floor. He saw Kate repositioning her wheelchair with the methodical calm of someone who had decided that what had just happened to her was not going to alter how she presented herself in the next 10 seconds. He did not go toward her. Every trained instinct pulled him in that direction. He resisted it because going toward her now would change the geometry of the room in ways that might accelerate what he was trying to prevent. He took 3 deliberate steps toward the front door, his movements unhurried, designed to read as a man stepping outside for air. He pushed through the door and let it close behind him. Outside, the October afternoon was bright and still. He moved to the far end of the building, out of the line of sight from the diner's windows, pressed himself against the warm cinder block wall, and pulled out his phone. 2 bars. He called, got a connection that lasted 11 seconds before dropping. Called again. The bars flickered. He moved along the wall further from the building, closer to the highway where the open space might give him something better. Inside the diner, the seconds he'd been outside already felt like a long time. Rex looked at the flag in his hands. Not roughly, not with deliberate disrespect. He had picked it up in a way that was almost careful, which was somehow stranger than roughness would have been. He held the folded triangle, looked at the gold lettering, and said nothing for several seconds. Kate watched him hold it. Her face gave him nothing. Her hands rested on the wheels of her chair, not gripping them, just resting the body at ease in the way that only comes from having made a decision about something. Rex set the flag on her table. Not a return, more like a setting aside of something he hadn't decided what to do with yet. "You gonna tell me," he said, his voice shifted now, "that you actually served?" "I did," Kate said. "In what capacity?" "Special Forces, 5 deployments, 4 years in a wheelchair." She said it the way you state a fact without emphasis, without the need to perform it. Something moved in Rex Boland's face. The complicated thing, the personal history with this subject that Kate had noticed when he first crossed the floor. He was too controlled to let it fully surface, but she could see its outline the way you can see the shape of an object under a cloth. Cutter had moved around to the left side of her booth. Scar had positioned himself near the window. Not conscious tactical thinking. The automatic arrangement of men who operated as a unit and had done so long enough that they distributed themselves without discussion. Kate noted it. She noted something else as well. The way Scar's eyes moved, not with the loose attention of a man waiting for direction, but with the focused scan of someone who knew what he was looking for. He was examining the room's exits, yes, but he was also examining Kate's wheelchair. Methodically, specifically. That was the tell. Casual aggression didn't produce that kind of search. Something in Scar's movement said that he had been told what to look for before he walked through the door. Kate held that thought, did not let it show. Rex picked up one of the ribbons from the floor. The bronze star, turned it over in his fingers. "They just giving these away now," he said. Not quite a question. "No," Kate said. "They're not." She reached out and took the ribbon from his hand. Slowly, calmly, the way you take back something that belongs to you when someone picks it up without asking. She set it on the table beside the flag. Rex watched her do it, his jaw tightened. Then Scar moved, not toward Kate, toward the wheelchair. Quiet, performing casual interest, hands moving to the underside of the seat with the practiced examination of a man looking for something specific. Kate felt it before she could stop it, a small controlled contraction in her chest. Scar's hand found the magnetic case. He turned it over, looked at the device inside. He looked up at Kate with an expression that was not angry, not surprised, but interested. The specific interest of a man who has been told to find something and has found it. "Rex," he said. His voice was quiet. It carried. Rex looked at the device in Scar's hand. He looked at it for a long moment, and in that moment, Kate watched his face change, not with surprise, but with confirmation, as if something he had suspected had just been verified. He knew what it was. He knew what it was without being told. Rex Boland moved to the front door in 4 steps and turned the lock with a single deliberate motion. The mechanical click of the deadbolt was the loudest sound in the diner. He turned and faced the room. "Everybody stay where you are." His voice was different now. The performance had gone out of it. What remained was the plain, flat authority of a man who has made a shift from one register to another and has done it without difficulty. The swagger was still in his posture, but it had changed shape, become less performative and more functional. Operational almost. Kate noticed that, filed it next to the other things she had noticed about Rex Boland, which were accumulating into a picture that was more complicated and more dangerous than the one she had brought into the diner. He walked back to her table and sat down in the booth across from her, putting them face to face. He placed the device on the table between them like an argument. "Who are you working for?" he said. Not a question, a demand. Kate looked at the device, then at him. "I'm not going to answer that," she said. Rex's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, both forearms on the table. "Wrong answer." "Then I'll give it to you again," Kate said. "I'm not going to answer that." At the counter, Everett Calloway was sitting completely still, both hands flat on the surface, looking at the middle distance, with the absolute focus of a man applying all his conscious attention to the project of staying in his seat and not doing something he has decided on balance would make things worse. The tendons on the back of his hands were visible. The family in the back booth, the father had pulled both children against him, and the mother had moved beside him. The four of them compressed into one end of the large booth. Jenny Aldrich, at the far end of the counter, was looking at the locked front door with the specific attention of someone calculating distance to an exit. Kate caught her eye, very slightly shook her head. Not a rebuke. Information. Not yet. Jenny held still. Cutter was at the window, not watching Kate anymore, but watching the parking lot, the highway beyond it, the approaches. The distribution of attention in the room had reorganized itself along lines that Kate recognized clearly. This was not improvised. The way Scar had searched the chair, the way Rex had looked at the device with recognition, rather than discovery, the speed with which Cutter had moved to cover the exits, this was a pattern. Someone had briefed these men. Someone had told them what to look for and where to stand. Kate did not let that register in her face. She looked at Rex and waited. Warren Fisk stood up. He had been still throughout everything. Still during Rex's approach, still during the crash, still when the flag hit the floor and the deadbolt clicked home. He had been to all appearances exactly what he looked like, a frightened businessman, frozen by the same fear that had frozen everyone else. He crossed the diner now, past the frozen couple, past the counter where Everett Calloway did not look up, and he stopped beside Rex's chair. He looked at Kate. He had not spoken once in the 37 minutes she had been watching him before Rex Boland walked through the door. He did not speak now. He just stood there, and the act of standing there beside Rex Boland, the ease of it, the absence of any adjustment in the body language of either man, that was the entire sentence. They knew each other. Kate looked at Warren Fisk. She looked at Rex. She looked at the space between them, the comfort of it. She had been watching Fisk for 6 weeks. She had built a file on him that didn't officially exist. She had come to this diner on this Tuesday because the pattern of his movements had made this the logical place and time. She had been running it alone because she had determined that alone was the only way to run it without the wrong people finding out. The wrong people had found out. She ran the calculation, quickly, without expression. Someone had known she was coming. Not the broad strokes, the specifics. The diner, the day, the cover, the device beneath the chair. Someone who had access to the information she had believed was contained to herself and one other person. The number of people who could have known was not large. The implications of that were not small. Rex looked at her across the table, and she could see that he knew she was running the math, and that this too had been anticipated. "Somebody told you I'd be here," Kate said. It was not a question. Rex said nothing. "Today specifically. This diner. This time." She kept her voice level, not a performance of calm, the real thing, the calm of a person who has decided that certain information is simply data to be registered and worked with. "Someone gave you the op." Rex's eyes were flat. "You want to reconsider the question I asked you?" "I've considered it," Kate said. "The answer's the same." Outside, along the wall of the building, Caleb Merritt had moved 40 feet from the diner's front corner, trying to find the edge of whatever was killing his signal. On the 12th attempt, he got through. Not to the number he wanted, to a duty officer who took his information and told him to hold. He held, pressing his back against the wall, listening to the muffled sounds from inside the diner, the low register of a situation that had changed from what it had been when he walked out. The duty officer came back, transferred him. A phone rang twice. A voice answered, senior authoritative, the compressed efficiency of a man accustomed to receiving information that requires immediate response. Caleb spoke quickly and completely. Situation, location, personnel, observed details. The locked door, the device found on the chair. Warren Fisk standing next to Rex Boland. Kate Morrison's name on the flag he had seen from across the diner floor. There was a pause on the other end that lasted 3 seconds. Not the pause of a man processing new information. The pause of a man receiving a confirmation of something he already partly knew. "Stay on the line," the voice said. "Don't go back inside." "Sir, that is not a suggestion," the sergeant. He stayed on the line. 2 minutes passed. 3. Through the wall, voices low, nothing sharp. He held the phone and watched the highway and did not go back inside, which was the hardest thing he had done in recent memory. Then from the east sound. Vehicles moving at highway speed, getting louder, slowing. He looked east along Route 40, through the heat shimmer shapes, getting bigger, getting closer. He felt something release in his chest, the first relaxation of a tension that had been building since he walked outside. He put the phone back to his ear. "Sir, I've got vehicles inbound from the east, at least 2, moving fast, about a mile out." A pause. "What would you see closing fast, sir, maybe 30 seconds out?" The voice was quiet for a moment. "Thompson, those are not our vehicles. We are 40 minutes out minimum." Caleb went still. Say again, sir. Those are not our vehicles. We are 40 minutes out. He watched the shapes on the highway get larger. He watched them resolve. A flatbed semi loaded with pipe sections, the steel gleaming in the afternoon light. Behind it, a delivery truck. Highway traffic. Ordinary highway traffic moving east at 70 miles an hour, slowing for the interchange, but not for Murphy's. Not for any reason except the ordinary geography of the road. He watched them pass the diner's turn without slowing. Watched them continue east and disappear. He was still alone in the parking lot. The door was still locked. Nothing had changed except that he had believed for 45 seconds that something was coming. Sir, Caleb said. His voice was flat. 40 minutes. 40 minutes, the voice confirmed. Do not go inside. I need you functional when we get there. Through the narrow gap beside the door's hinge, Caleb had seen Rex's reaction to the approaching sound, the stiffening of posture Cutter moving from the window toward the door, the brief contraction of alertness running through all three men. He had seen it hold for 30 seconds. Then he saw it release. Cutter had looked out the window, seen the flatbed pass, and turned back to the room with something close to amusement. Said something low to Rex, and the specific relaxation that moved through Rex Boland's body in that moment, the easing of a man who has realized that the threat he prepared for was not real, was the most dangerous thing Caleb Merritt had witnessed all afternoon, because Rex Boland now knew that no one was coming quickly. He had tested it involuntarily, but tested it. The test had returned a negative, and the muscles of the situation had just shifted in a direction that Caleb, standing in the parking lot with 40 minutes of wait ahead of him, could do nothing about. Rex picked up the flag. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately, communicating that this was a choice rather than an impulse, which made it a statement rather than an act. He held it open between his hands and read the name aloud. Not loudly, not mockingly. In a flat, deliberate voice that carried because the room was very quiet. He read the name and the designation and the line about extraordinary heroism. And when he finished, he looked around the room with an expression that was asking for something, acknowledgement perhaps, or complicity, and then he looked at Kate. At the far end of the counter, Everett Calloway moved. He did not stand up. He did not gesture. He placed both hands flat on the counter, straightened his back by perhaps half an inch, and in a voice completely without emphasis, the flat, deliberate voice of a man who has decided something needs to be said and has decided to say it without decoration, he said, I know that name. The room heard it. Rex turned to look at him, took in the Desert Storm cap, the age, the hands on the counter, the absolute stillness of a man who had made a decision and was not going to be moved from it by the force of another man's presence. Sit down, old man, Rex said. I'm already sitting, Everett said. He turned back to his coffee cup. He picked it up with both hands and took a sip. His hands did not shake. Rex watched him for a moment. Then he turned back to Kate. Something had changed in the room that Rex Boland could not have named, but that everyone in it felt. One voice, one flat sentence, one cup of coffee, picked up without trembling. It was not a rescue. It had changed nothing about the logistics of the situation. But it had changed something, some ratio of what was possible versus what was being performed as inevitable. Kate had not looked at Everett when he spoke. She kept her eyes on Rex, which was itself a thing she was doing. Rex walked the length of the diner slowly. He looked at the family in the back booth, looked at them for a long moment, the father and the mother and the two young children, the youngest pressed against her father with her face turned away. He walked past the counter where Everett Calloway sat with his coffee. He walked back toward the front of the diner. He stopped at the service station where Jenny Aldrich was standing. Jenny was 19 years old and had been working at Murphy's for 3 weeks. She had no training for this kind of situation, no experience of it, and she had been managing her fear with the particular courage of someone who has decided they are not going to fall apart regardless of what their body is requesting. She had been standing very still and breathing very carefully, and she had been doing it well. Rex put his hand on her shoulder. Not roughly. That was the horror of it, the deliberate lightness of the grip that said, I could grip harder, and we both know it, and the fact that I am not is itself the threat. Jenny went very still. Rex did not look at her. He looked at Kate. Last time, he said, who are you working for? What is in that device? What are you collecting? The room was absolutely silent. Kate Morrison looked at Jenny Aldrich. She looked at Everett Calloway at the counter, hands flat back straight, bearing witness with the dignity of an old soldier in a bad situation with limited options. She looked at the family in the back booth, the father with his children folded against him. She looked at the young couple in the corner. This was the calculation she had not let herself run all the way to the end. She had believed she had more control over the conditions than she in fact had. She had accounted for Rex's aggression, had factored it in. She had not accounted for this, for the hand, for the lightness of the grip, for what it communicated about what he was willing to do to people who had nothing to do with any of this. She looked down at her hands. They were the same hands that had held a weapon for 6 hours in Kandahar. The same hands that had done the work that earned the flag now lying on the table beside her coffee-stained book. Experienced hands, hands that knew the difference between a situation that required action and one that required patience. She looked at them for a long moment. The ceiling fan above table 9 wobbled in its slow, persistent orbit, the slight rhythmic imperfection of something that had been running too long in a single direction without correction. She heard Everett Calloway breathing at the counter, slow and even. She heard her own thinking, not literally, but the quality of it, the movement of calculation through the architecture of a trained mind working a problem. And somewhere in that calculation, arriving not as a dramatic realization, but as a simple fact she had been holding in reserve, she found the thing she had not yet said to anyone in this room. She looked up from her hands. Rex was watching her, still with his hand on Jenny's shoulder, waiting. Kate Morrison looked at him and smiled. It was a small, specific thing. Not warmth, not defiance, not performance. The smile of someone who has been waiting for a particular door to open and has just heard the latch turn. Rex's eyes narrowed. Outside along the wall of Murphy's roadside diner, Caleb Merritt stood with his phone pressed to his ear and 38 minutes left on the clock, watching the highway and trying to understand what he had just seen through the gap in the door. He had seen Kate Morrison smile. He did not know what it meant, but he thought instinctively from experience, from the knowledge that comes from having once watched a woman hold a position that no one should have been able to hold, that whatever it meant, it was not good news for Rex Bullied. The afternoon light was changing. The sky was beginning its long, slow shift toward evening, the blue deepening, the shadows extending eastward from every upright thing. Inside Murphy's roadside diner, the day was not over. Not even close. Part 3. What was always true. The smile stayed on Kate Morrison's face for exactly 3 seconds. Then it was gone. Not replaced by anything else. Just gone the way a light goes off in a room you're leaving completely without residue because you no longer need it for what comes next. Rex Bullied had developed over 4 decades of operating in the margins of other people's rules, a reasonably reliable instinct for when a situation had shifted in a direction he had not caused and could not immediately account for. It was not a sophisticated instinct. It manifested as a physical sensation in his chest, a tightening, as if something in his body had received information that his conscious mind was still processing. He felt it now. He took his hand off Jenny Aldrich's shoulder. He did it without deciding to. His hand simply moved the way a hand moves when the thing it was holding has become something it does not recognize. Jenny stepped back 2 paces and pressed herself against the counter and did not make a sound, which took more composure than most people would have managed. Rex looked at Kate. "Sit down," she said. Same tone as before. The tone she had used when she told him to go back to his table at the very beginning, before the grab, before the crash, before the flag hit the floor. The tone that carried the unhurried authority of someone who had been giving instructions in environments where the consequences of not following them were permanent. Rex did not sit down, but he did not move toward her either. "You want to tell me," he said slowly, "what you think you've got to smile about." Kate reached across the table and picked up The Art of War. She placed it in her lap. Her hands were completely still. "When you pushed my chair into the wall," she said, "the impact broke the latch on the magnetic case. You saw that." Rex said nothing. "What you didn't see," Kate said, "was what the impact also did." She let that sit for a moment, not for drama, because she was watching his face and she wanted to see the exact moment when he understood, and she wanted to time what came next to that moment. "The device has an impact sensor," she said, "standard protocol for field equipment running without backup. If the device sustains a significant physical event and direct communication is unavailable, it defaults to emergency broadcast. 11 seconds of compressed data to a secure server. Everything it had collected since I sat down." Rex was very still. "That broadcast went out 42 minutes ago," Kate said, "when you put my chair into that wall." The diner was so quiet that the ceiling fan above table 9 sounded enormous. Rex did not move for a long moment. His face was working through something that had too many layers to resolve quickly what she was saying. The implications of it, the specific quality of having understood that you have been moving through a situation you believed you were controlling, only to find that the situation had its own architecture, established before you arrived, that your every action had been accommodated by a plan you did not know existed. "You're lying," he said. "I'm not," Kate said. "But I understand why you need it to be true." Cutter had moved up beside Rex, looking at the device on the table, then at Kate, then at Rex. His jaw was tight. Scar by the window had turned away from the parking lot and was watching Kate with his stillness. And for the first time since he had found the device under the chair, something in his expression had changed. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The recognition of a man who has been in enough bad situations to know what one looks like from the inside when you are the one inside of it and not the one who designed it. Rex picked up the device from the table, turned it over in his hands. He was looking at the impact sensor housing a small rectangular module on the underside, and Kate watched him find the indicator light, which was red, which indicated that the broadcast protocol had been completed, which indicated that it had already happened, which indicated that it could not be undone. He set it down. He set it down the way you set down a thing that has become something other than what you thought it was, with the care of a man who is being very deliberate because he does not trust what his hands might do if he is not deliberate. "Warren," he said. Fisk had not moved from where he stood beside Rex's chair. He was looking at Kate now with an expression that had shed completely the careful anonymity he had maintained for the past hour. The mild businessman had been replaced by something harder and more frightened, the face of a man watching the shape of his immediate future change. "Warren," Rex said again, and his voice held something new. Fisk said nothing. He was still looking at Kate. Kate looked back at him, and in her face was the first direct acknowledgement she had given him since he stood up and crossed the diner to stand beside Rex Boland. Not warmth, not triumph. The simple recognition of one professional acknowledging another in the moment when the professional engagement between them has concluded and the outcome has been determined. Outside on Route 40, a sound was growing from the west. Caleb Merritt heard it first because he was outside and because the open desert carried sound in a way that walls absorb. He heard the engines before he saw the vehicles, and the engines were not highway traffic and were not motorcycles. They were the controlled, purposeful sound of multiple vehicles moving in coordination, the specific mechanical signature of people who drove the way they did everything else with training and a destination they were committed to reaching. He stepped away from the wall. From the west on Route 44, vehicles came into view. Two dark SUVs and two unmarked sedans moving fast, but without lights, pulling into the parking lot of Murphy's roadside diner with the economical precision of people who had planned this arrival before they left wherever they had come from. Then a fifth vehicle behind the first four. Federal plates. And the two men who stepped out of it, one in military bearing, one in a suit carrying credentials, moved with the specific efficiency of people who have done this before and intend to do it again before the week is out. Caleb stood at attention without deciding to. Colonel Hargrove crossed the parking lot toward him, late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that does not diminish with age, but changes character, becoming less about force and more about the accumulated weight of a man who has made difficult decisions in difficult places for a long time and has learned to carry the results without letting them alter his gait. He looked at Caleb once, a complete assessment in 2 seconds. "Sergeant Merritt." "Sir." "How many inside?" Caleb gave him everything precise and sequenced. 11 civilians, including one minor, 3 hostiles, 1 locked door, current positions as of 4 minutes ago, Warren Fisk standing beside Rex Boland, and Kate Morrison sitting at the booth by the window, the smile he had seen through the gap in the door that he still couldn't account for. Hargrove listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, the colonel was quiet for a moment. "The broadcast," Hargrove said. "You know about the broadcast?" "I know there was a device, sir. I know it was found." "The broadcast went out 42 minutes ago," Hargrove said. "That is why we are here. Not because of your call, Sergeant. Your call confirmed location and status. But the authorization for this response came from the broadcast." He paused. "Captain Morrison's authorization, filed through FBI Albuquerque before she came into this diner today." Caleb processed that. "She planned for this," he said. "She planned for everything," Hargrove said, and something in his voice occupied the territory between pride and exasperation, where a commanding officer lives when discussing a subordinate who has exceeded every brief they were given. He looked at the locked door of the diner. Everything except the specific variables she needed to remain uncontrolled. He turned to the man in the suit and gave 3 words that Caleb did not hear. The man nodded and moved toward the side of the building toward the kitchen entrance. "Stay with me," Hargrove said. He walked to the front door of Murphy's roadside diner and knocked. 3 measured impacts. The knock of someone who has come to conclude something rather than to begin it. Inside, Rex Boland turned toward the door last. He had been looking at Kate, and he turned with the movement of a man who has been trying to hold two things simultaneously and has just been forced to acknowledge that one of them is heavier than he believed. He looked at the door, then at Kate, then at the device on the table with its red indicator light. He walked to the door and turned the lock. He did it without being asked. The way a man sets something down when he has carried it far enough and the destination has arrived, regardless of whether he chose it. He turned the deadbolt and stepped back, and Colonel Hargrove came in. He came in alone. Behind him, through the open door, the parking lot was visible, and in it, positioned with the quiet functionality of people who had done this enough times to have developed preferences, were 14 people who did not need to be inside to be present. Hargrove looked at the room. He took in the family in the back booth, Jenny Aldrich at the counter, Everett Calloway's hands flat on the counter surface, his back straight, his Desert Storm cap on his head, the ribbons on the floor, the flag on the table. He looked at Warren Fisk, who looked back with the expression of a man who has arrived at the end of a long road and found that the end was exactly what he had been afraid it would be. He looked at Rex Boland. Something moved through Hargrove's eyes when he looked at Rex, a layered thing, a look with history in it, the look you give a specific kind of problem you have seen before in different forms. Then he looked at Kate Morrison. He walked to her booth. He stood in front of her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The diner was completely silent. Outside, through the open door, the afternoon light came in with the smell of dry desert air and pavement in the particular quality of a day that is moving toward its end. "Captain Morrison," Hargrove said. Kate straightened. "Automatic. The posture of someone who has never stopped being what they are, regardless of what container they occupy." "Sir," she said, "are you hurt?" "No, sir." Hargrove looked at the coffee stain on her jeans, at the broken magnetic case on the floor beside her chair, at the flag on the table. "The broadcast came through clean," he said. "I know," Kate said. "Everything we need." "Yes, sir." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Then in a different register, "You want to explain to me why the authorization for this operation was filed through a protocol that routed to FBI Albuquerque rather than through my desk." Kate held his gaze. "Because I wasn't certain the information about this operation was contained to the people it should have been contained to." Hargrove processed that. "And now," he said. "Now I know it wasn't," Kate said. She looked at Warren Fisk. "And now we know where the leak was." The man in the suit appeared beside Fisk. He had come through the kitchen door, while Hargrove came through the front. He opened the credential wallet. He said 2 sentences. Fisk put his hands out in front of him, wrists together, and looked at the floor. Hargrove turned to Rex Boland, and what he said next he said quietly in a voice pitched for Rex and for the room, because what he was about to say was not private and was not meant to be. "Rex Boland," Hargrove said, "military intelligence contractor 2003 to 2016. 13 years. You were good at it. Genuinely good. That part is in your file, and it is documented, and it is true." Rex said nothing. His face had gone to a blankness that was not calm and not fear, but the suspended state between them, held breath of a man waiting to hear the shape of what is coming. "In 2016, your contract was terminated," Hargrove continued. "Clearance pulled. Everything you had built over 13 years gone. And you have believed because the partial file you accessed before your clearance was revoked told you so that the report which ended your career was filed by a Captain Gerald Whitmore." Rex's jaw tightened. One involuntary movement. "Captain Whitmore signed it," Hargrove said. "He did not write it." The room was absolutely silent. Hargrove did not look at Kate. He did not need to. Rex turned. He turned the way something turns when the axis it was rotating around has shifted without warning, slow and heavy and irreversible, with the momentum of something that cannot stop itself once it has started. He looked at Kate Morrison sitting in her wheelchair by the window with her book in her lap, and her hands resting still on the armrests, and her green eyes meeting his with the same level unflinching quality they had maintained since the beginning of the afternoon. 4 years before that report," Hargrove said, his voice dropping slightly, "Captain Morrison led a 6-man team into a Taliban compound in Kandahar province. The objective was the extraction of a captured Air Force pilot who had been held for 11 days. The team reached him, and on the way out they were surrounded." He paused. 50 to 1. No air support available. No reinforcement possible. The family in the back booth was completely still. The children, who had not fully understood what had been happening all afternoon, understood now that the room required their silence, and they gave it. "She ordered her team to go," Hargrove said. "All of them. The pilot, every man on her team. She stayed behind to hold the position alone. He let that sit for the length of time it needed. She held it for 6 hours. Jenny Aldrich at the counter set down the coffee pot. It made a small sound, and in the silence of the diner, that small sound was very large. When we fought back to her position, Hargrove said, and now something had come into his voice that was not performed, that was simply the weight of facts that are true in a way that costs something to say. We found her unconscious under the rubble of a mortar round. She had lost both legs below the knee. She was still facing the direction of the enemy. She was still holding her weapon. The elderly veteran, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the counter, a man no one had paid much attention to in the chaos of the afternoon, bowed his head. Not dramatically, the way a man lowers his head when he has been given something too heavy to receive upright. The pilot she saved has 3 daughters now, Hargrove said. Every man on that team went home to their families, went on to serve, went on to live. He looked at the case on the table, and the man who was supposed to go home with Captain Morrison did not. He reached into his jacket. He removed a photograph. Small, worn at the edges, the kind carried for a long time in the same pocket. He placed it on the table in front of Kate gently, the way you place something irreplaceable on a surface you trust. Kate looked at it. Staff Sergeant Ryan Burkett, 31 years old in the photograph in uniform, with the easy confidence of someone who had done difficult things and believed he would do more of them. He was looking slightly off camera, caught in the middle of something, a laugh, or the beginning of one, or the moment just before a laugh becomes real. The photograph had been taken in a place with too much sun, and the light was sharp on his face, and his eyes were the specific shade of light brown that photographs from that region always rendered a little too warm. Kate looked at the photograph. She looked at it the way she looked at it every time, carefully, completely letting herself look at it all the way, rather than the partial looking that makes it easier to set back down. Her hands did not move. Her face did not change. But something in the quality of her stillness shifted, became something slightly different from the tactical stillness she had been wearing all afternoon. Became something older and more personal. Staff Sergeant Ryan Burkett, Hargrove said quietly. He covered the team's exit route. He bought the minutes it took to get everyone out, including Captain Morrison, who was already down when his position was overrun. He paused. He was 26 days from the end of his last deployment. He and Captain Morrison were to be married in March. The diner received this. It received it the way a room receives something true, not with drama, but with the small involuntary adjustments of people who have been given information that has weight to it and who must now redistribute themselves to carry it. The young woman in the corner booth put her hand over her mouth. The father in the back booth pulled his children closer, not from fear, but from the instinctive need to hold something close when you have just heard something that costs you something to hear. Kate picked up the photograph, carefully. She held it in both hands for a moment, and in the gesture was everything she had not said and would not say about what it had cost to be the person who came back when Ryan Burkett did not. She placed it in the case beside the flag, and she closed the case with both hands, and she put her hands flat on the table. Hargrove turned to Rex Boland, and his voice changed register one final time, not colder, not harder, but more precise. The precision of someone ever arriving at the point they have been building toward. She came back, he said, not to a desk, not to a quiet life and a pension she had more than earned. She came back to the work. She counsels wounded veterans at the VA hospital in Albuquerque. She runs operations that don't officially exist in service of this country from a wheelchair without asking for recognition or requiring it. He looked at Rex directly. So when you walked into this diner today and saw a woman in a wheelchair and decided she was something you could take something from, you were looking at someone who had already paid more than you will ever be asked to pay. And the flag you picked up off this floor, the man whose name is on it alongside hers didn't come home. He didn't come home so that other men could. He stopped. The silence held. Rex Boland looked at the case on the table, at the closed latch, at Kate's hands flat and still on the table surface. He stood with something on his face that was the most complicated thing that had been on it all day. More complicated than the rage, more complicated than the contempt, more complicated than the moment when he first crossed the floor and saw the tab on her chair. It was the expression of a man confronting the specific kind of reckoning that happens when the story you have been telling yourself about who you are and what you are doing meets the version of events that was always true. He stood with it. He did not collapse under it or argue with it or perform it for the room. He stood with it the way a man stands with something heavy that he has been handed and cannot give back. Then he looked at Kate. You were the one, he said. His voice was almost nothing, almost not a voice at all. Yes, Kate said. You knew who I was when I walked in. I knew who you were. You knew I was coming. I knew, Kate said, that if someone told you I was here, you would come. And I knew that if you came, you would behave in a way consistent with how you have always behaved when you feel challenged. And I knew that Warren Fisk would not be able to resist confirming his relationship with you once the situation made it appear safe to do so. I needed him to do that, in this room, with the device running. Rex was quiet for a long moment. You weren't the target, Kate said. You were never the target. You were the mechanism. Rex Boland looked at her, and she looked back at him, and the full architecture of the afternoon was visible between them now in its actual shape, which was nothing like the shape he had believed it to have when he rode into this parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon, believing he was the one springing the trap. Every element of it, the contempt, the aggression, the flag on the floor, the locked door, the hand on Jenny Aldrich's shoulder had been anticipated, factored into a plan that was already concluded before it began. Rex Boland had spent the afternoon believing he was dangerous. He had been useful. The thing I said, Rex said quietly, about the chair, about the badge. He stopped. I was wrong. Not an apology built around itself, not a negotiation. 3 words flat and direct and without adornment. Kate nodded once. The man in the suit appeared beside Rex. He said the 2 sentences he had said to Warren Fisk. Rex put his hands out in front of him, wrists together, and continued to look at Kate for one more moment. Then he looked away, and the man in the suit led him toward the door, and that was the end of Rex Boland's Tuesday afternoon. Cutter and Scar were handled by 2 of the people from the parking lot who came through the door with the quiet efficiency of people executing a procedure they had completed before. No raised voices, no drama. The sounds of it were small and procedural, and it was over in moments. Warren Fisk was already outside. The diner did not return to normal all at once. It returned the way light returns to a room after a long storm has passed gradually from the edges, the ordinary sounds of the world reasserting themselves as the extraordinary thing receded. Someone coughed. A fork was set down. The young couple in the corner exhaled at almost the same moment, which they probably did not notice. The father in the back booth said something quiet to his children, and Caleb Merritt, standing near the entrance, now could not hear the words, but could read in the children's posture as they shifted against their father and something in them released. Jenny Aldrich looked at the room for a moment. Then she looked at the coffee machine behind the counter. She walked to it. She poured a cup. Her hands were steady. She carried it to Kate's booth and set it down on the table in the space where the previous cup had been before it spilled. She did not say anything complicated. She said, I'm sorry it took a minute. Her voice was not entirely even, but it was there and it was hers and she held it. It's all right, Kate said. Thank you. Jenny nodded. She went back to the counter and began doing what she had been trained to do, which was move through a room and make sure the people in it had what they needed. She did it with the slightly shaken but genuine purpose of someone who has decided that the best response to a difficult hour is to return to the work. Hargrove stood near the door speaking in low tones with the man in the suit. Outside the parking lot was operating with the quiet organization of a concluded operation, the transfer of specific problems into the custody of specific institutions performed by people who had done this before and would do it again and did not require an audience. Caleb Merritt stood near the entrance. He had come back inside when Hargrove went through the door, and he had stood near the entrance through all of it, through Hargrove's account of Kandahar, through the photograph, through Rex Boland's final look at Kate, and the 3 words he said, and he had not moved from his position near the wall, and he had not spoken. Now he walked toward her booth. He stopped at the edge of it. He looked at the ribbons on the floor, the ones that had scattered when the magnetic case broke open and had been lying there through the whole of the afternoon, through all of it, small and bright on the checkered linoleum. He went down on one knee. He did not make a production of it. He did not frame it for the room or look at anyone else while he was doing it. He went down on one knee on the diner floor and he picked up the first ribbon. He knew what it was. He had been in enough places and stood in enough formations and attended enough ceremonies to know exactly what each piece was. He turned it in his hands correctly, oriented it, set it aside. He picked up the silver star first because he knew its precedence. He turned it over once, placed it down carefully. The bronze stars, next 3 of them, each one set beside the last in the order they had been awarded, which he arranged correctly by the kind of knowledge that accumulates in people who have spent enough time near the things that earn them. The Purple Heart last. He placed it at the end of the row and looked at what he had assembled on the linoleum floor of Murphy's roadside diner. The whole room was watching him without appearing to. The young couple in the corner. Jenny Aldrich paused in the act of refilling Everett Calloway's coffee. The family in the back booth, the children watching with the open attention of young people who have not yet learned to pretend they aren't looking. Patricia Murphy visible through the service window, her hands still on the prep counter. Caleb placed the ribbons in the magnetic case in the order they belonged. He did it slowly and without error. He placed the certificates and the small cards. He picked up the photograph, last Ryan Burkett's photograph, which had slid partially beneath the case when Kate closed it. He held it for just a moment before setting it carefully inside. He picked up the flag. He held it for the length of time it takes to understand what you are holding. Then he placed it on top of everything, face-up gold lettering, visible, and he closed the case and held the latch closed with his thumb for a moment. The latch was broken and would not hold on its own before setting it on the table beside Kate's coffee cup, with his hand still on it, keeping it closed. He looked up at Kate. She was looking at him. He had thought for 4 years that he did not know what he was going to say to her when he finally stood in front of her. He had not arrived at anything adequate, which was probably the correct response. Some things do not resolve into language, and the attempt to force them into it does damage to the thing that was true before you tried to say it. He stood up. He stood at attention. He rendered a salute, not a performance of one. The real thing, rendered correctly, held the correct duration, returned to rest. Kate looked at him for a moment. Then she raised her right hand and returned it from her wheelchair. The clean and simple gesture carrying everything it needed to carry in the absence of anything else being said. "At ease, Sergeant," she said, "and thank you for the call." "Yes, ma'am," Caleb said. He stepped back. He did not say what he had wanted to say for 4 years, because the moment had already said it, and adding words to it would have been a diminishment. Everett Calloway finished his coffee. He did it the way he always finished his coffee, slowly, with both hands around the cup, looking at the middle distance without urgency. He had been sitting at the same stool for the same length of time. He sat at every Tuesday, not rushing, not lingering, simply completing the thing he had come to do. He set the cup down. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed his wallet. He opened it and took out the bills. He always left 2 5s and someone's, the amount he had settled on years ago as the right number for a man in his circumstances, eating what he ate and drinking what he drank. He looked at the bills for a moment. He put one set back. He put down $40. He folded it the way he folded all his bills, lengthwise precise, the habit of a man who had learned in the Kuwaiti desert that small habits of order keep the larger things in their right places. He set it on the counter beside his cup. He stood up from his stool. He adjusted his Desert Storm cap. Not a hat gone crooked, it had not gone crooked. The gesture of a man completing something, putting the last element in place before he steps away. He looked down the length of the diner toward Kate Morrison's booth. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the case on the table, or appeared to be, her hands resting on the surface beside it. Everett looked at her for the length of time it takes to say something without saying it. Then he put on his jacket and walked to the front door and pushed it open. And the October evening came in briefly, dry air and distance, and the particular quality of a day that has become something other than what it started as. He walked out into it. The door closed behind him. His truck started in the parking lot. An old engine, reliable, a little rough at idle, the sound of a vehicle that had covered a lot of ground and intended to cover more. The sound of it came through the walls of the diner and then moved away east on Route 40 in the direction of whatever Tuesday evening Everett Calloway had to go home to. Patricia Murphy watched him from the service window. She had known Everett Calloway for 9 years, had known his order and his stool and his habit of sitting without hurry and leaving without ceremony. She watched his truck disappear east down Route 40 and said nothing. Hargrove came to Kate's booth one last time before he left. He stood at the edge of it, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Outside the window, the parking lot was almost clear. The man in the suit's vehicle was gone, and Fisk with it, and Rex and Cutter and Scar in separate vehicles with separate destinations. The afternoon was concluding itself the way afternoons conclude when the event that defined them is over. "You want to explain to me," Hargrove said, "why you ran this alone." "I ran it the way the conditions required it to be run," Kate said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "I ran it alone because I didn't know which part of the chain was compromised. I ran it alone because if I had told anyone with access to my operational file, the broadcast would have gone out to the right server for the wrong reasons." She paused. "Ryan would have run it the same way." Hargrove was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the case on the table, at Caleb's hand still resting on the broken latch holding it closed. He looked at the flag inside it, at the gold lettering just visible through the gap. "The leak," he said. Someone with access to my file and to Fisk's known patterns. I narrowed it to 4 people. The operation was designed to eliminate 3 of them as possibilities by making them unnecessary to what happened in this room. The 4th, now that Fisk has been taken, will identify themselves by their next move. Hargrove looked at her for a long time. You could have been killed, he said. Yes, sir, Kate said. I factored that in. He put his hand on her shoulder briefly. The way a person touches something they want to acknowledge without turning the acknowledgement into a scene. Captain, he said. Sir, she said. He straightened up, picked up his jacket from the back of the booth across from her, walked toward the door. Before he went through it, he stopped. He did not turn around. He spoke toward the door, so what he said went out into the evening rather than back into the room. Next time, he said, come through my desk. He pushed the door open and walked out, and the door closed, and the diner was quiet. The jukebox, which had been silent for a while, chose something from wherever in its mechanism songs come from. Waylon Jennings, low and deliberate, a voice that sounded like it had been places and had decided to keep going anyway. The kind of music that doesn't ask anything from you except that you sit still and listen. The family in the back booth began to reassemble themselves, the father releasing his children from the proximity they had maintained for the past hour, the kids returning immediately and with profound relief to their negotiation over the remaining French fries, which had gone cold and which they ate anyway because the cold was not the relevant quality. The young couple ordered pie. Jenny Aldrich delivered it with hands that were steady and eyes that were bright in the way eyes are sometimes bright after something has been survived. Caleb Merritt sat at the counter. He ordered coffee and a piece of peach pie from Patricia Murphy, and he ate it slowly and looked at his hands and thought about things that he did not share with anyone. The 2 truckers who had been present through all of it and had said nothing, which was perhaps the most useful thing they could have done, paid their checks, nodded at Caleb, and went back to their trucks and their routes. Patricia Murphy came out from the kitchen and stood at the end of Kate's booth. Captain, she said. Kate looked up. I've been running this place for 16 years. Patricia's voice was even and simple. Your coffee is free here. Your food is free. As long as I run this diner. I know that's not much. It's plenty, Kate said. Thank you. Patricia nodded. She went back to her kitchen. The diner settled into the particular quiet of an evening, beginning to think about itself. The afternoon light coming through the window had changed. It was doing what late desert light does, warming the blue of the sky, going amber at the edges. The kind of light that makes ordinary things look chosen, as if everything it touches has been specifically placed. It came through the window beside Kate's booth and lay across the table and across the case and across the cover of the book in her lap. Kate opened The Art of War. She found her page. The tape repair of the spine cracked slightly, as it always did when she returned to this particular section, which she had returned to more than any other. The margin notes here were denser than anywhere else in the book, layered in 2 or 3 different inks corresponding to different years, different theaters, different versions of the understanding she had arrived at and then revised. Her eyes moved to the lines she had been reading when Rex Boland first crossed the floor toward her. In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. She looked at the note in the margin beside it, written in ink so old it had faded to near invisibility. She had written it years ago in a version of herself that had not yet learned all the things she had since learned. But the note was still true, only if you planned for the chaos. She looked at it for a moment, then she looked out the window. The parking lot of Murphy's roadside diner held the ordinary vehicles of ordinary people now. The family's minivan, the young couple's car. A piece of paper had blown against the far curb and sat there moving slightly in the desert wind that comes up in New Mexico when the afternoon gives way to evening. On Route 40, traffic moved east and west under a sky that had deepened to something richer than afternoon, the light going orange at the horizon in the west, while the east was already beginning to darken. Trucks and sedans, and the occasional RV, making its way through the particular vast indifference of the New Mexican landscape where the distances are real and the sky is honest, and neither one asks anything from you except that you keep moving. She thought about Ryan Burkett because she thought about him every day, and today she let herself think about him for the length of time it takes the desert sky to change one shade, which in New Mexico in October is not very long and is also forever. Then she turned the page. The following Tuesday, Everett Calloway's stool at the far end of the counter of Murphy's roadside diner was empty. Patricia Murphy left his coffee cup out the first week filled and ready. The second week she left it out, but did not fill it until someone sat down. The third week she put it back with the others. He did not come back. He had come every Tuesday for 9 years, through all the seasons since Carol died, through the slow accumulation of time that follows a loss when the loss does not diminish so much as it changes, shape becoming less like an absence and more like a presence you have learned to carry. He had come because he had not known what else to do with a Tuesday afternoon, and he had kept coming because showing up had become itself the thing. He had said 3 words across a diner in the direction of a woman he did not know. $40 left on a counter, folded lengthwise precise. It was the only way he knew to say the thing he had no language for. It was enough. In the way that small, true things sometimes are, it was exactly enough. The last of the evening's customers left Murphy's as the sun was going down. Jenny Aldrich said goodnight to Kate, and Kate said goodnight to Jenny, and the diner was quiet except for the Waylon Jennings song playing itself out on the jukebox, and then the jukebox too went quiet, and the only sound was the ceiling fan above table 9 still wobbling in its slow orbit, the slight rhythmic imperfection of something that had been running in the same direction for a long time. Kate Morrison sat with her book and her coffee and the case on the table beside her. She did not need anyone to know what had happened in this diner today. She had not needed them to know 4 years ago in Kandahar, when the work had cost her the most expensive things she had. She had not needed it in any of the places before that. She was 34 years old. She had given what she had given. She would continue to do what needed doing. The world would go on the way. The world goes on mostly unaware, mostly indifferent, grinding forward in its great complicated motion, and that was fine. It was in fact the whole point. The work did not need an audience. The work needed to be done. She put her hand on the case and felt the broken latch under her fingers. It had been broken since Rex Boland shoved her wheelchair into a wall an hour and a half ago, and in the breaking of it, everything that needed to happen had happened. She would get it repaired. She picked up her coffee. She turned the page. Outside on Route 40, the last of the day's traffic moved through the deepening evening, and the desert ran in every direction toward distances that the human eye could not resolve, and the New Mexico sky completed its long daily transformation from the blue that promises everything to the dark that keeps its counsel. She didn't need anyone to know her name. She just needed the work done. And today it was done.